Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for giving me some of your, yet more of your time. My name is Phoenix Normand, and this is Ask Me Anything. And our expert today is someone who who actually reached out to me when I sort of posted, "Hey, LinkedIn, need help." Reached out to me, and the funny thing is, I've sort of seen her posts around and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, she's kind of dope. I should probably reach out to her at some point. And then when she reached out to me, I was like, okay, wait a minute. We had the best conversation about HR. It was real, it was poignant, and I was just like, yeah, her. So first of all, let me introduce you to Angela Shaw. Angela, I'm gonna sort of hand it off to you to do your own introduction, just because I always leave stuff out, and you know you better than I know you and your history. So if you actually just wanna start, that would be great.
Okay, so my name is Angela Shaw. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm currently the Vice President of HR for CampusAdvantage. We manage student housing. I've been in HR for over 20 years. HR is my first love. And I went into HR on purpose. And as I've grown my career in HR, I also developed this passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that has become my passion project. So I feel like I'm a double threat as a HR subject matter expert, but also a person who can push for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I responded to Phoenix. I'm actually not a person who likes to argue. So I don't like to debate. And I told him that. But I thought his post was respectful. And I see so many people who just bash HR, and they put them in this category of like they said, they did, who is they?
Right.
So I wanted to reach out and put a face with HR and talk about like this good HR, this gospel of the good HR. So he's right, we had the best conversation and we thought it would be good to just come talk to all of you.
And I love that because again, and you're right. I mean, I think, we have this situation. Sorry guys, let me give you just a quick heads up. For those of you who've just joined, make sure that you mute yourself, please, just so to keep the background noise away from the conversation. Thank you. But, one of the things that that just never really sits well with me is when people malign other people or, other departments within companies without having the full story. I admit anytime I'm guilty of anything, trust me, I will happily raise my hand. And I admit I've been, kind of a little bit of a detractor of the HR people. It's in my book. I mean, I had like this whole section about the times that HR failed me. I'll give a quick scenario if that's okay. When I was working for this major retailer, at their headquarters, I had a boss who, I guess thought we were familiar like that. And he decided to, when he thought that I didn't understand, his question, he smacked me on the back of the head with a big fat duh. You know what I mean? And this is in front of, it was open plan offices. This is in front of the entire team. So here's the dilemma that puts me into. One, I'm a man and another man just hit me. So automatically my rage instincts come out, but I'm also, a professional and I can't necessarily lose my S, pick his butt up and throw him off the 7th floor balcony. Probably not a good look for me. So, that put me in the space of one, emasculation, two, just obviously rage mitigation and just trying to figure out, okay, how do I just make it through the rest of this day without killing somebody, essentially. So of course I sat on it. I went home a little bit early because I was just, really hurt, to be honest with you. And I thought about it. I came in the next day. We made it through like maybe a week or two. And I just had all of this just anger built up. It ended up where I started getting a tingle down my left arm. Felt like there was something crazy sitting on my chest, all the signs of a classic heart attack. So I'm like, you know what, whatever. So I literally start walking to the hospital because I was right down the street from it. Walk to the hospital. He somehow calls me on my cell phone asking where I am. And he's just cursing me out for not being at work. And I'm sitting there like, okay. And I told him, I'm like, you know what? I think I might be having a heart attack. So I really don't want to have this conversation with you right now. So I just hung up on him, went in, they hooked me up to an EKG. It comes back acute myocardial infarction, which in doctor's terms, that means heart attack. You're having a heart attack. So immediately they stripped me, put me on a gurney, cart me up to ICU, CCU, and call my mom. So that's part one. Part two is, as we're going through all of this, et cetera, I get, of course, hospital bills are super duper expensive. They had to transfer me via ambulance from one hospital to another to look for a specific cardiologist because I was young. I was only 31 at the time. And so it ended up, the bills were starting to pile up. And then the insurance company started calling me. So, and they were blowing my phone up. Of course, I reached out to my HR people who happened to be kind of a friend because I used to also sing at night with Lettucey. And, she would actually, they would always end up coming to the shows at this one particular club. And so we had, created a little bit of a friendship. Now, that's another reason, Angela, I'm going to get you on this one. Not get you, but I really want you to like put me straight on this one. You know what I'm talking about? But, it got to that point where it felt like she completely separated any sort of relationship with me whatsoever. And I basically spent the last 2 days in the hospital, hooked up to all these damn monitors and stuff, woken up at every hour on the hour to have a blood draw, all this stuff. It was just torture. But I also had to deal with, workers' comp saying, oh, we're not paying for that. That happened, your insurance should cover that. Then calling the insurance, oh, no, this is a workers' comp claim. And this back and forth. And then me trying to involve the HR person who basically did this. She's like, you know what, here are the two numbers. Here's workers' comp, and here is our corporate insurance. Good luck. So as I'm sitting there, possibly dying or whatever the hell was wrong with me, it really, unfortunately, and you know this, Angela, I'm sure you've heard every horror story on the planet, but it gave me such a bad taste in my mouth that I'm paying essentially into this system to an extent, or at least it's coming out of my check, et cetera, but it's failing me on all sides. And the fact that an HR person would hand off basically my own sort of, care and paying for these, bills and everything else without offering some real honest help to someone who was doing a good job. And I didn't do anything wrong. I got smacked on the back of the head by some idiot. You know what I mean? So all of that said, sorry, just wanted to paint, a nice rosy picture. Not rosy, but at least a truthful picture. That's really what sort of cemented my maybe distrust of HR, even though, I kicked myself for even saying, HR. Really, it's that particular person who failed me, not the entire group. You know what I mean? So that's another reason why I wanted to sort of have this conversation so that we can really get our perspectives right when it comes to when we talk about quote unquote HR. HR is inconsistent across all companies because each company has their own sort of way of doing it. So, I do have a number of questions with regard to why there's such an inconsistency across, especially if it's, you're basically learning the same thing, I'm assuming. And I'm hoping that's a good assumption. If it's not, I'm sure you'll set me straight. But, Angela, that's really, I would love to just hear, I have a question written here, what are we missing with regard to HR?
Well, just even with your story, like there's just so many pain points there that I feel like I could address.
Right.
I think in your specific situation, that was just a bad HR person.
Oh, it was terrible.
So that's what I would say about that specific situation. So like with any industry or job, there are people who shouldn't be doing that job. And I think that was definitely a situation of that. You mentioned I think you're all learning the same thing. I think that's an interesting point because not everybody professionally develops themselves to be learning, right? And then I would say it's that individuals, like how they got into HR. So a lot of people just kind of thought it's one of the functions in an organization that most people think that anybody can do. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, oh, you're nice. You should come be our HR person. Where if somebody brings up an HR concern, oh, well, how about you take that on? Mm-hmm. How about you start doing HR? And that happens quite a bit. I teach an Essentials of HR class, and one of the things I always talk about is that individual being a leader in the organization, regardless of their position, them taking a personal stand for how they do HR, and then like preaching this definition of your gospel of good HR. So like, how do you set that definition for yourself?
Right.
And the things that you use to set that definition, you have to stand for something. You have to have your own philosophy. And I find that a lot of HR people don't do that. And so when they go into an organization that's bad, people tend to take on the bad tendencies very easily. And therefore they take on the tendencies of the organization. So as opposed to a person who is confident, a person who is knowledgeable, a person who understands how to take a stand and how to speak up, they take on these bad traits and then become this bad HR that everybody's talking about. I could talk forever. I'll stop there.
No
Your questions.
No worries. No, this is fantastic. And I think, that's something I've always wondered, is it actually wise that HR be a part of the company? Would it actually be better for HR to be sort of like a separate entity, a consultant that's sort of outside looking in? Therefore, they're not kind of pulled into the politics of what the CEO wants to do, or what the senior managers kind of bully people into, that sort of thing. So I'm just kind of curious if that's
my personal opinion is no. I feel like the most effective HR is going to be inside of the organization, and that you just need a good HR person who's going to do the right things, who's going to have the right conversations to push for positive interactions, right? So even in my own organization, one thing that I constantly talk about is relationship building and how employees communicate with each other, with their managers, and what that looks like. Because if you have that good relationship building, when issues arise or difficulties come up, you've already kind of set this ground for, we know how we treat each other.
Right.
I think organizations who talk a lot about culture, who talk a lot about values that they have, how do you put those values, how do you live them in how you treat each other? And so in a great organization, they have those things, values, and knowing how to treat one another, and they really use them. We're definitely not perfect, but it is definitely, we work towards living our values. We talk about it a lot, and we talk about this relationship building through communication and how we speak to one another, one-on-ones, like just all the ways to communicate that are not new. These are not like grand ideas that nobody's ever heard of,
right.
But I think that people have a hard time doing the actual things, putting in the actual work to make work relationships work.
Right. And well put. And I'm curious what that actually looks like, especially since we're all, remote, at least until, Q3 of this year in a lot of cases. So, you did bring up something that I actually kind of want to dive into, or maybe I brought it up in that little scenario, is I also spoke with a couple of other HR professionals, and they mentioned this one thing to me, and it really stuck. We are not your friend. And that can be taken a multitude of ways. I mean, I think one of the things that has always sort of been quote unquote sold to me when joining companies is that HR actually is your friend, meaning at least they want to come across as your friend in the sense of, if you have any grievances, or if you just need to talk, drop by, blah, 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 with, kind of giving that sense of, oh, okay, we got you, we want to hear you, you will be heard, if it's an issue that needs to be elevated to the C-suite or whatever else, we're happy to do that on your behalf, involve you however much you want to. If you're having a problem with another executive or another peer, come to us first, that kind of thing. But then when things get crunchy, that's kind of when the rubber meets the road, where it's like, okay, well, I've told you a lot. I've had many instances where people come to me crying and they're just like, I went to HR, told them something in confidence, and they freaking blabbed it to the very person I didn't want to hear it. You know what I mean? So I think, to your point, what you said is, and maybe it's kind of a question as well, is what's that delineation? Like what sort of keeps you, on the track of resolving your grievance, but at the same time protecting yourself from potentially, some retaliation if word gets around or
So
people.
that HR person who blabs is a
Yeah.
person who should not be in HR. And
Love
that
that.
person blabs because that is the culture of that organization. It's not
Right.
just HR. That
Right.
is something that happens. And again, that's an HR person who doesn't stand for anything
Mhm.
and who allows themselves to be swayed by whatever's going on in their organization.
Right.
I don't put titles on like my relationship with employees,
Mhm.
so I wouldn't describe it as I'm your friend.
Right.
And I think it goes back to what I was talking about before with the relationship building piece of it. So how we have conversations with managers, how we have conversations with employees, how we build a basis for our interactions going forward. So I describe it in those terms of how we relationship build and communicate with one another. And again, I mean, it sounds rote, but go back to our values as an organization and how we treat each other based on those values. So I'm not going to put a title on it to be like, I'm your friend or I'm not, I'm your enemy, I'm your whatever. But I feel like what people would, like any people who have encountered me in a HR relationship in any organization I've been in, they're going to say I was a good communicator and that I would build relationships. And I think that's what it should be based on.
Right.
Now, I do think that there is a line, right, between how an HR person socializes within the organization. And I feel like you set those standards for yourself. I'm not going out drinking with the marketing department. That's just not something I'm gonna do.
Right.
And I set that standard for myself because nobody needs to know that the head of HR was like falling down drunk at the club or whatever. So I think you need to set your own personal standards. I will attend the in-office happy hour and have a half a cup of something and then be on my way.
Right.
So I think, you set those standards about how you socialize and how you interact outside of a work environment or outside of you just doing work.
Which makes sense. I've worked for executives for, especially in tech for many, many years. And, one of the things that I always sort of, it seems to me I've always sort of encountered some sort of pushback with regard to, when we're going basically from, one employee to 20, and then from 20 to our first 75, and then from our 75 to 112, or, that sort of thing. There's this sort of tipping point where it gets to a point where it's like, yeah, okay, I've been your executive assistant. I've basically been doing all the HR functions and all that other stuff, but it's time to hire, a true HR professional. So that's one of the things that I feel kind of gets lost in the shuffle, because a lot of executives are like, you're doing a great job. What are you talking about? Like, let's not spend that kind of money. I remember one at this one startup that got bought out by TikTok. He would always say, he's like, I don't want that kind of what do you call it? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing
like rule
making and structure and all that. He's like, then it's no fun. Like, I want to keep having fun. You throw great parties, just keep an eye on people, make sure they don't get too drunk or, whatever else, and we'll be fine. And I'm just like, are you on crack? Like, seriously, like, it makes no sense, because I was witnessing every single day all these infractions at other companies, like when I was working at Levi Strauss or Square or whatever else. Half of this stuff would get you so sent to the principal's office, so to speak, just because it was, unfortunately, the culture was, it was a bit of a sausage factory. So the culture was, sort of just saying whatever the hell you please and being okay with it. But as we started adding more and more female employees, I was seeing these grievances where I'm just like, yeah, you can't say that. I became known, I used to send thunderbolts, because all the company was on Square. So anytime on Slack. So anytime I saw someone type something that was just so inappropriate, it was thunderbolt. And you would hear this like resounding laughter, within the group. And I'm just like, yeah, nah. So all that said, quick question for you. Like, with startups, if you were basically consulting with a startup, and it's time for real HR, what should they be looking for as far as an HR professional? Obviously not handing it off to their executive assistant, so annoying. But what should they really focus on in order to bring someone in that can really hit the ground sprinting and quickly get everything together without, maybe being so regimented or whatever else, even though.
So I think it depends on where the organization is in their journey, and do they want someone that's going to grow with them, which means they're learning on the job, they're educating themselves about the things that they need to know to make decisions going forward. Or if it's a organization that's a little further along in their journey and they need somebody who actually has some experience, who can set up structures, right? So structures of how you do things. I think when it comes to instituting HR brand new in an organization that hasn't had it before, there's a few things that you want to be done. There's a compliance piece, because as you grow, there are just things you have to comply with, period. And someone needs to be knowledgeable in how to ensure this compliance takes place. I mean, yes, it has to do with diversity and discrimination and all these things, but there are actual like governmental reports and stuff that need to be run when organizations get to a certain size. The payroll part, there are these things that need to happen. There's also the culture piece. So if the organization has some defined culture, the HR person can help grow that and keep it organic in the way that they want it to happen. The other big thing I think that HR does that a lot of people don't even realize is communication, actually. So like the conduit between employees and managers and how that communication goes back and forth. The L&D part of HR, even if they're separate, I mean, they're very collaborative. And how are we training our organization? And again, training our organization in not just how do you do your job, but how we treat each other, what our culture is, like what we stand for, and just making sure that that's weaved throughout the organization. So, I mean, you can certainly get a person who has a passion for HR, knowing that they're going to grow into this job and grow with the organization, but it's also making sure that they get the right professional development to be able to do the job. And that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or you're at a point of, you're like, oh, I need somebody who can just come in. Like we have a lot of recruiting to do, right? So we're going to grow by 50%. You need an actual recruiter, not somebody who's learning on the job who can come in and like do that kind of stuff. I would compare it to like, as a person matures in their life, right? They do different things. That's the organization is the same way. As you grow as an organization, you're going to do different things. Doesn't mean that you have to lose fun.
Right.
You should have a different kind of fun.
Right.
A more responsible fun.
And fun within the rules.
Yeah.
2 drinks, not 4.
Yeah. And then go home and have
and
the
then
rest
go
of your
home.
drinks.
Exactly.
Yes.
An Uber. Don't even get in the car.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I've had some absolute horror stories, and it happened every single year with regard to those damn Christmas parties. Oh my gosh. Every Monday after was an HR like
Nightmare.
S show. Exactly. Because you saw, everybody, everyone's typically right there and they see everything that's going on. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that poor HR person.
There are things that HR people hate too. Like HR people hate Christmas. They're
School
like,
us. I want to know the tea.
No Christmas parties. No Christmas parties. We don't want Christmas parties. No happy hour at work. Like whose idea was that? No, none of that. These situations in which we're gonna have to clean up stuff. It's like, no, nobody wants that. Questions like, we want to send everybody, gift boxes. Can we include alcohol? It's like, oh my God, why would you want to do that? And it's like, you don't want to be the police, right? Just always saying no. And it's like, okay, how can we mitigate risk? Because there is some of that. We can't just completely not talk about it, right? It's there. So how can we mitigate, some of this? I also, and I think a lot of HR people would agree with this. We also don't like employee of the year, employee of the month.
Bless you.
Like those things. Y'all, let me tell y'all how much trouble. Even service awards,
right?
Because it's the whole thing about I left and came back, and why doesn't this 3 months count? And I was a contractor for this 5 months, and it's like, oh my God, I cannot.
I get it, and I'm not a big fan of those awards either. And I know I've got some award winners on my on this call, so apologies. Not trying to be disrespectful, but I just think I personally think it sends the wrong message for people who may be a little less visible, if you will, but who might actually be killing it in the role, beyond what their expectations are. And I think, sometimes seeing someone else that you may or may not feel actually deserves that award can be soul crushing. And then you're dealing with, that decline in, wanting to even be in the room, that sort of thing. So,
and it's subjective.
yeah,
Like,
it is.
I haven't seen a process yet
Yeah.
that's not subjective.
Exactly.
I mean, and I'm a part of processes like that,
Right.
but
Right.
Yeah.
That's a rough one. So you guys, do me a favor. If you have questions for Angela, please type them in the chat. I'm kind of going through. Lorette, I saw your I saw your post, and I appreciate that, by the way. Let's see.
There was a curious about Angela's values specifically.
Yeah. Bring it on.
So first, as I've talked about values, it has been my organization, which I will share our organizational values, which are intelligence, mojo, which mojo is like just the magic part of who we are as an organization, our passion, and our integrity. And so everything that I talk about, I always draw it back to our values. And we actually have a really involved competency model that we use related to our values. But me personally, like my personal values are to treat people the way they want to be treated. So not the way I want to be treated, but the way they want to be treated. And I think everything that I do as a professional and a person, and when I interact with people, that is always how I try to do it. Right. So it involves like emotional intelligence, which is, I really know myself, and I know myself well. I know when to take myself out of situations. I know when I need a time out. I know when I need to work from home and I don't need to see people. Right. Like I know myself really well, but I also work really hard trying to know the other person. Yeah. And when I interact with people, it is, especially when there are differences or disagreements, what did I do? Whatever I did, how did it make them feel? Right. And try to respond in that way. Right. So like always making it about the other person. And if there are problems, again, I make it internal to how can I be different? How can I do better? How can I bridge a gap? Always make it about me, because that promotes continuous growth in myself. Right. Which is great. I mean, I think, again, that's really what it comes down to. And I had a sort of like a morality question on there, but you basically answered exactly what I was reaching for. A couple of good questions that came in, one from Evelyn, and this is one that actually was in my book. Do you recommend that a person lawyer up before they even go to HR with their problem? I mean this only for situations that will require a lawyer. So I think it depends on the situation. I mean, everybody, yes. So you can make your own decision. So absolutely, yes, do that if that makes you feel more comfortable. Yeah. But I would say the advice I would give if you couldn't afford that or you weren't able to do that is make sure that you're following internal processes. Right. And also personally being above reproach. Right. So it's like a common situation is like a person gets put on a performance plan for something, right? So like, I don't know, you come late every day. Maybe it's attendance, you come late every day. And you have a boss who's a jerk who could be doing something illegal, like harassing you or discriminating against you. But unfortunately, when we talk about a power struggle, the person with the power wins. And if you have like behavior on both sides, the person with the power is going to win. And so that's why I say keeping yourself above reproach and you following processes. So the process for how do you file a complaint within your organization and follow that. The process, document your own situations and what's going on, have your own write-ups and information that you know about. If you receive disciplinary action, always writing your response to that and getting it attached officially. Love that. Signing the document doesn't mean you agree with it. It just means that you got a copy of it. So just stuff like that and just following the internal processes. If you're going to file a complaint against somebody, I would also notify your senior leadership. And if they're not on executive leadership, also someone in executive leadership, so that at all levels, everybody knows what's going on. Right. So this organization can never say, we didn't know. Right. So as an individual, I followed the processes, right? I'm above reproach and I notify all the right people. Right. And so then if HR doesn't react or if it's not the reaction that you want,
Mhm.
you know it's coming from the top because
Right.
you've notified all the people involved.
Brilliant.
And it's not just you having a conversation with HR or needing to blame them.
Mhm.
HR is actually not always the blame. So
Right.
there's a few things that happen. You know, you have to remember they're also employees getting beat down.
Mhm.
So if bad things are happening to you, guess what? It's probably happening to HR also.
Right.
But they need to pay mortgage. They have kids. They have student loans. They
Mhm.
need to keep their jobs also.
Yeah.
You could have weak leadership at the top who allow middle managers to run roughshod over everybody in the organization because they work hard
Right.
or whatever, they're productive. You know, these things happen also. Or the bad leadership could actually be at the top. If you're
Right.
thinking like a Uber or a Papa John's where it
Right.
came straight from the top,
Straight
no,
from.
no HR people in those organizations are ever going to be able to do anything
Right.
that is taking care of employees
Right.
because it's coming straight from the top. And so
Right.
those are all things you have to consider too.
Right. And that's really, really important because I found that a lot of times, I mean, the real sort of moral compass starts at, starts in the C-suite. So, anything that sort of rolls down from there is hopefully based on what the actual morality of the person running the company or who came up with a great idea is doing. And unfortunately, if that person is a complete idiot, like in the cases of Uber, way back and, several other of these companies, then no matter what the HR person does, they're not going to be able to sort of morally correct get the train back on the tracks because unfortunately anything that they bring to that particular executive is probably just going to be like like no, this is my company, this is how it should be run, you do your job, I'll do mine, that kind of BS. And you know I feel for a lot of HR representatives just because I've seen really really good ones um, get sort of beat down, like you said, get beat down, get, every idea sort of canceled before it even, becomes an actual idea. And it's exactly like you said. I mean, they still need to pay, that Montessori bill. They still need to, have a money for a mortgage. So they just go back to doing the very basics. And I think that's where people sort of lose their empathy because, we all have the exact same issue, typically with the relationship with our managers. If our managers don't listen to anything we say all the time and kind of are always on our necks and all this other stuff, then yeah, you sort of shrink and you just do the bare minimum until you can figure something else out. And HR unfortunately is such a broad has tentacles, I should say, like all over the place, in order to keep an organization on the right side of the law. The last thing you want is an HR person that feels unempowered and sort of just stuck doing paperwork essentially. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, let me get to another question. What was it? Sorry guys, some good questions in here, thank you. Oh, here's a good one. Angela, can you talk about bouncing back as an HR professional after failure and how to recover professionally from the circumstances of the situation? Thank you, Elizabeth, for that question.
That's a great, great question. So I think if you have other people in leadership positions who can speak to your work ethic, I think that definitely helps you. You may have to take a couple of steps back when you think about positions you're looking at. I would really rely on your network to help you bounce back. So reach out to people who care about you, and not just people in HR, but just people that you know, period, professionally, that can also help with that part too. And that's like outside help, but I think internally building your own confidence back up. And it's hard to say what the ways are to do that because every person's different. But I think find ways to build your own confidence back up. So maybe it's a personal project that you're working on, maybe it's a side hustle that you do, whatever that thing is to help you build your confidence back up, because you have to forgive yourself first. So if you don't grant yourself grace first, if you don't forgive yourself, it's going to be real hard to move forward. So you have to work on that internal piece first, to get that confidence back and just forgive yourself. It's okay. Everybody makes a mistake.
I love that. Here's another one from Adele. With companies on the surface pushing for diversity and inclusion, are they truly inclusive with the diversity? In other words, should you feel comfortable in saying, for example, that you are neurodivergent? so, thanks, Adele, I get the question. But specifically, it's, and especially since you're a D&I specialist as well, what's the real, like, seriously, what's really going on? Because I've also been of the belief that, again, it starts at the top. If you have a sausage factory that, that is lacking melanin and thinks that everything is fine, profitability and everything else seems to be tracking according to what they consider to be right, yet there's absolutely no diversity in the C-suite, how does that even, how do you even sort of help change that narrative for them? Because I find that a lot of those guys are actually the worst snowflakes when you start calling them out on the fact that, you have like no Black friends, there's like 3 chocolate chips in this whole cookie, and they're, sorry, that's probably an HR violation. But that's one of the things that I think a lot of us,
back to me today.
who really, sorry about that, who are, whoops, there we go. A lot of us who are wanting real diversity and real inclusion, is, how do you fight that fight?
Yeah, so the news on that, y'all, is not positive. I
Thank you
think
for saying that.
so. I mean, I'm just gonna tell y'all the real. The news is not positive on that. It's hard. It is hard, and even in the wake of George Floyd and the social unrest and what we thought was going to be all of this grand action, I mean, it hasn't manifested itself yet. And to be honest, people are not even talking about it as much as they were. And it hasn't even been a year yet.
Right.
So the reality of that is just sad. I think, again, you have to have the right person who's willing to speak up and have conversations with leadership and see how you can get this leadership support. What I have found is that even if your leadership team doesn't completely understand what it means to support, if you can at least get the freedom and some monetary resources, you can still push for some change in the organization. And so like things like what happened to George Floyd, I think it gave some DEI consultants and people some of that freedom and resources to come into organizations to try to help. But this change takes time because it's a mindset. And so when we think about systemic racism, we think about the historical systems and things that have been in place. It's hard to break that down.
Right.
And you need everybody working towards it, or definitely multiple people at multiple levels kind of working towards it for there to be real change. So in my own current organization, which I talk a lot about, and it's just not a secret, they hadn't really talked about DEI very much before I started to work there about 1.5 years ago. And then when George Floyd was killed, I stepped up to say, we have to do something. And everybody's been very supportive of that. And we've actually done quite a bit of work. And so I think from the outside looking in, it'd be like, oh, well, that's not a lot of progress because maybe your numbers haven't changed. But I'm pushing for lasting change. So I don't want to be a flash in the pan. I'm not trying to check a box. I don't just want to have a performative reaction. I want for people in our organization to actually change. So this is our year of normalizing conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And every single month we're having programming. We're bringing in outside people to have conversations because they need to hear from more than just me. We are putting together a committee to help roll out easy initiatives, because once you can normalize that conversation, then you can start making the changes like inclusive language in your job descriptions, enhancing your talent pool to be diverse, calling hiring managers to the carpet because their team is not diverse. And we provided these resources and tools for them to be able to do this. And we've normalized this conversation, right? And we're shining a light on behavior that is not in line with what we've said as an organization that we want to do. Yeah, so I think it's a long-term effort.
I agree. And, I remember it's been 400 years since we, slaves basically came over and laws and everything. So I won't go down that rabbit hole because I'm actually going to be doing a separate Ask Me Anything on that probably in the next week or two. So prepare for that one because it's going to be juicy.
Even when we think about all the factors though, right? Not just race, but we think about women, when we think about people with disabilities, veterans, mothers, all the moms who quit their jobs because of COVID, because they're staying home with their children. I mean, all of these factors and normalizing how we talk to moms about being able to work and take care of their kids.
Right.
Like, we're going to spend this whole year talking about everything.
I love that. And I love that. And I think that's another really, really strong point is the fact that, diversity and inclusion and diversity, run the gamut. Like you said, it's not just about, hiring more women, hiring more, minorities and all this other stuff. There are people that are working with disabilities. There are people who are physically disabled that we tend to sort of like gloss over because, it's sexier to talk about this, or this. So, I think there's such an opportunity, especially, through HR, good HR representatives to really shine a light on it. I think that's really what it kind of comes down to. I think the lack of exposure to it is really, it creates this sort of comfort zone, especially if you can still be, completely profitable without having to address the hard issues, right? So, I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping over time, just keep plugging away. I think you're doing a fantastic job with that, with regard to like monthly information workshops, etc. Sorry, just quickly looking through these questions. Oh, okay. Here's a question. Speaking of the C-suite, what would you, meaning you, look for in your CEO or ask of your CEO to make sure he or she is cultivating a great relationship with you as the HR lead? In other words, what would you, you probably already
I get it.
the
There's
question.
a couple of things. There's a couple of things.
Bring it on.
One is equity in pay when it comes to title.
Preach.
So if I'm a vice president, my pay needs to be equity with every other vice president that you have. So that's the first thing that I'm going to look for.
Right.
The second thing is a seat at the table.
Mhm.
So if you have other vice presidents at the executive leadership table, that I'm at this table also. And the third thing I would say is support of my ideas and opinions. So like if your CEO comes to you and says, we have this problem with whatever, and then, I come back with these solutions and you don't like any of them and you just go do something else, obviously you don't respect me as a subject matter expert. So I think that respect of being a subject matter expert, and that's an active thing, like you're shown that in an active kind of way.
Right.
And so for me, that's what it would be. And so again, just my own personal situation of I have the seat at the executive table. I now report to the CEO, having that line of communication. But it's also me doing my part, right? So I need to come with the information. I need to come with the transparency. I need to come with the questions and the ask for our employees of our organization and be able to speak to that.
Right. Brilliant. Sorry, I'm just bombarding you with questions today. Here's another one. How do you address unhealthy work practices with leadership? For example, working 7 days a week, especially as executive assistants, we get this all the time. It's that sort of soft, oh, hey, you don't have to, worry about this right now. I just wanted to, send it to you to get it out of my head. But damn well that, they have this sort of, expectation that you're going to be like, oh, no worry, boss. You walk on water. I'll knock it out real quick before I put my kid down. You know what I mean? It's like, so I'm curious, what is it? Working 7 days a week and staff being burnt out, but having guilt when taking time off due to this long-term continuous pattern. I think, I've been in that situation numerous times where I just work and not have a day off. And then when I want to take a day off, all of a sudden it's like, oh, can you like push that to like next month? You know what I mean? So I'm just kind of curious, like how should that be addressed?
So I think you train people how to treat you.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder when you have this history of letting them walk all over you, right? But you have to be able to come back from that.
Right.
But I do think that there's actually truth in it, right? Yeah. So on the weekend, when they send you the email and say you don't have to knock it out right then, guess what? Don't knock it out right then.
I agree.
I think when it comes to like reach out after 5 or 7 or whatever, setting the structure for that. So maybe it's actually sitting down and having an actual conversation of what I have a family. I always do this with my kids at this time or whatever, like whatever this conversation needs to be of, can we agree to, maybe an email blackout time, right? So 7 to 7 or whatever the right, decision is. But I think having that confidence and gumption and, you know, to just go in and have that conversation to try to retrain them how to treat you. But again, because I always come back to like your individual responsibility. So what that means though, is that during the time that y'all agree to, you're meeting your standards. Like you're working towards these standards of excellence so that these are not extra questions or things that didn't get done, or they're asking you about some project that you haven't given them an update on. Like you have to do your part too. So when you're training somebody how to treat you, they're also going to know that you have standards of excellence and that you're getting things done. And that thing they sent you on the weekend that they said was an emergency is really not, because y'all would have talked about that during the week.
True.
So you're going to train them how to treat you, and you're going to do your part so that they respect you because they know you're going to get stuff done.
Right. Brilliant. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and get crunchy again. So here's I guess a question for you, or at least, you know, I just want your opinion. A lot of tech companies have moved to this sort of at-will employment paradigm. And I've found more often than not that it basically, it seems like it creates this safeguard for them, the company, that if a grievance is raised, they can basically, you know, depending upon the grievance, in other words, if it's something that's going to affect the employment, for instance, of one of their partners or something like that, it's an easy way to sort of term an employee based on this whole at-will thing. I've been on the losing end of an at-will firing, but I made them pay me like really well to get them to get rid of me because that was a whole other situation. It's in my book. You know, but I've seen that be weaponized against employees. You know, you walk in one day and all of a sudden there's an empty desk and you're like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, you know, so-and-so left. And, you know, you find out through the grapevine that they filed a complaint with HR, for instance. And next thing you know, they're terminated. No sort of, you know, real process. It feels like the process was basically all protected, quote unquote, under that at-will employee paradigm or you know, thing that you obviously, you know, sign as part of your offer letter. So I'm curious, what's your take on the whole at-will thing? Because I see it being abused more than used effectively, in my opinion.
So unfortunately, it falls on the employee or ex-employee to be able to prove that something against the law happened.
Right.
Because laws are not actually instituted for protection, even though that's what we think and are taught.
That's what we were taught.
Laws provide like your recourse. What do you do after something happens to you? So you'd have to be able to prove that it was done illegally. Two phrases for everybody to know: wrongful termination. So if you feel like you were terminated for some discriminatory reason, it's wrongful termination, but you'd have to be able to prove it. So what are these things that happen? And it goes beyond, I filed a complaint with HR, right? It's your actual documentation of the things that happened to you that you filed with HR. So I was sexually harassed 3 times by my VP. On these dates, this is what happened. This is when I went to HR. So that's the first one. The second one is constructive discharge. So sometimes when organizations make you quit because they just do such awful things to you that they just make you quit, that's constructive discharge. But again, you have to be able to prove what are these things that happened to you, and did they happen to you for some factor? Because I'm a woman, because I'm Black, because I'm whatever. You know, you have to be able to prove that.
Right.
So I do think that organizations and states that they use it to weaponize as a weapon against people, they absolutely do.
Yeah.
These systems that we work in the workplace, they're not designed for employees, and nobody, HR, nobody can, you know, do anything about that unless the organization wants to do something about it. So if an organization is terminating people at will and actually saying that that's their reason, yeah, they're definitely weaponizing it, and there's probably very little that HR can do.
Right. Which makes sense. And I've seen it, you know, again, in like a lot of these super mega organizations here in Silicon, well, I'm not in Silicon Valley, but in Silicon Valley when I worked there. So, it sickened me, to be honest with you, because it's, you know, even for me, like when I got terminated, I went through, I read everything because I was just like, okay, we're going to lawyer up today because this is not right. But the money was good. So I was like, okay, yeah, y'all can have this, I'm out. So let's see. Well, actually, you guys, if someone has a specific question, unmute and ask.
We can ask.
Go for it. Hey, Laurette.
Hi. I'm just, based on those last two exchanges you had, I'm just emphasizing journal your process.
Always.
But people don't. They get so in the like, oh, woe is me, and I have no rights. And it all adds up to, yeah, you're that empty desk that people saw on Friday with no explanation.
And no recourse.
Document your day-to-day and your feelings attached to that for when you're cornered. That's your book. That's your reference. That's what everything is based on. It's not feelings, it's time, date, place. Do not take that for granted in this so-called diversity and inclusive equity cloud we're all driving around. Thank you.
Great. I love it.
Laurette, I would actually say that I don't believe that people are under this cloud, because people are not being treated with respect because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Nobody's actually, people just talking about it. They're not actually using it as a good thing in their organization.
And I'm also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm referring to those who reach out to that. Well, I've got that to look forward to, diversity, equity, inclusion, and it ain't there, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's not, true. You're right.
It's not. And I think Angela said also earlier that, you know, it's kind of bad news because it's going to take a while. And a lot of this is because a lot of the C-suites don't look like the people that are actually within the communities that their companies are actually in. Let's be honest here. So, you know, until there is some real change at that level, where there is not only, and when I say change, it's not a bunch of classes, it's really experiential. Meaning if you've got people of color on your board, you know, on your board or in your leadership team, et cetera, then that gives you perspective on a daily basis of, you know, maybe some of the struggles that you may not see as, you know, this wealthy white man of a certain age. You know, you might hear from a Black woman who's on your leadership team tell you about, hey, there seems to be like this, you know, civil unrest brewing, you know, within the group because people are not feeling represented, you know, that sort of thing. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to take a while, you know, but at the same time, the thing that pisses me off, and that's happened many, many times, you know, and in companies that I've been with, is that whole at will thing. It's like, I don't want to even deal with that. Therefore, I'm going to find a way to terminate you. And guess what? I can do it with with this beautiful clause that, you know, every pretty much tech company on the planet has instituted as part of their guidelines or whatever else. So, you know, I see through it, to be honest with you. I see exactly what it is and what it's doing. But again, until we can really sort of call it out and talk about it, then it will continue to happen. And, you know, people of color, people of different ethnicities and, you know, genders and, you know, with different disabilities and stuff like that, we're always going to have to be the ones walking on eggshells, you know, when everyone else can kind of run around scot-free, you know, drink 1, 2, 3 drinks too many, go back to their desk and barf, you know what I mean? Yet show up on Monday and have no issue, you know, whereas if I do it, you know, I all of a sudden it's just like, maybe you aren't the right one, quote unquote. So yeah, I went there. We'll talk more about that on race on that next one.
One thing I would add too is if you're going to take up the mantle to have a fight, be ready for that.
Yes.
Because remember, every action has a reaction. So you got to be ready for what's getting ready to come, because people are not going to take it lying down.
No.
Why your own documentation is so important, and being above reproach is so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm a big believer too that, you know, that's when you almost have to have an alter ego, meaning if you're being screwed with, then you need to get ready to take some action, which means you need to start documenting everything. You know what I mean? You can do all that kikiing and smiling that you want to do, perfectly fine. However, the second you hear some crazy some crazy stuff, then, you know, you need to have that go on Tribe. I sell notebooks, but go on, you know, find something where you can start really documenting that stuff. That's a lot of times what saved me. That's why when I got let go from that one place, I documented everything, because I was like, I smell some bull. And sure enough, the bull ass came. So I had all the documentation in the world. I actually also turned on my recorder when I was going into the meeting that I knew I was getting fired at, I turned my recorder on and stuck it under my notebook just because I was like, if I have to use this in a court of law, guess what? You basically said it. And I called them out on the carpet for the things that they were blaming me for, and they didn't really have an answer. But then all of a sudden my boss is just, the one that I couldn't stand. He basically said, you know what, let's just end this conversation. I just need to let you know that you're being let go. However, here's this, and this. And I ended up walking away with like 50K, which is awesome. But, it was heartbreaking. And it took me a while to get over that because I've never been fired before. And then on top of that, I was doing a great job. In fact, they named a conference room after me. Hello. So what the hell? So anyway, that's probably far from this HR conversation, and we're going to be wrapping up. If anyone has another question, by all means, please unmute yourself and ask it.
I have a question for Angela.
Of course.
Hi, Angela. So my question is going back to having the engagement from executive leadership, and now you have the freedom and the resources. What do you recommend you do with the resources? So
I think it depends on the problem you're solving for. So for me, when it comes to like diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm putting programming into place. Like that's what the resources I asked for was money to be able to bring in outside speakers, to be able to have book clubs, to be able to do activities that are going to help us normalize the conversation. And the freedom, I'm using it to actually put these things into play. So it's like, nobody's like, what are you gonna do? Can we see your PowerPoint? What are you gonna talk about? And I plan stuff and put stuff into action. And we're having conversations about it. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to, put into play. When I came into the organization, they had just expanded the HR department. And so I took those extra FTEs and put them to work, like in a good kind of way. Like we instituted an HR business partner model to help to enhance communication so that every department had like a HR person that they go to for their things. And it only gets escalated to me if there's like an issue or something out of the ordinary, or for some reason the situation blows up. But they have this person that they relationship build with that can help them through all their things.
Okay,
Makes sense.
Thank you. At the company that I work at, we have an ERG and we now have a budget. So with having access to these funds, the question is, how do you use this in a positive way to ensure that we have effective change moving forward? So what
what's your
impact can we
goal?
make?
What's your goal for your ERG? And then once you know what your goal is, then you put the money towards that goal. So like my goal is to normalize conversation. And you do that by people hearing conversation all the time and from not just within the organization. So that's why I'm trying to do extra things like a book club or having an outside speaker. That's because my goal is to normalize conversation. So I'm putting it towards that.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
That's brilliant.
You're welcome.
We have time for one more question. If anybody wants to unmute, by all means, do so.
Hi, Angela. Hi, Phoenix.
Hey.
Thank you for this conversation as well. I just wanted to move back for 1 second onto the diversity and inclusion. One of the things, because I fall under the umbrella of neurodiversity because I'm dyslexic, I'm also pushing for companies that put their manuals, policies and procedures and make them audible instead of in writing. A lot of companies have never thought about doing that. Have you heard of companies pushing for that, and also probably doing them via video so that people like me, for example, if I'm given a 20-page manual, I will not read that. But if you give it to me audible, instantly I will, absorb that.
Yeah, that's actually the first time I've ever heard that as an idea.
I'd
but
actually
it makes
prefer
sense.
it.
Well, just like Audible books. I mean,
Yeah.
It makes sense. And that's actually, well, I guess depending on the company,
Right.
That's something that doesn't have to cost a whole lot either.
No. I actually had a conversation the other day with the lady in Brisbane who is in tech, and she suffers from Asperger's syndrome.
Mhm.
And we had that conversation that no companies in Australia that we know of offer manuals for policies and procedures audible. So I'm going to push that in as much as I can, because I think it's important.
think
Yeah,
it's
that's
brilliant.
that's an excellent idea.
It is. It's brilliant. I mean, everyone listens to Audible books these days. Nobody wants to read a book. No one read mine. No, I'm just kidding. It's also 399 pages, which that's why. So anyway, so we are at time. Angela, thank you so much for keeping it real and giving us something to think about and giving us like a different perspective, because I think, again, like you said at the top of all of this, really seeing HR as just this behemoth is not it at all. I mean, it still comes down to individual contribution to doing great work. That's really what it comes down to. So it's good for us to sort of get that out of our heads, looking at this business entity as just this large thing that's either you're on the right side of them or you're on the wrong side of them, kind of thing. I don't think that's the answer, and certainly not the right perspective. So I hope this was helpful to everyone. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it. And I will list on the recording of the video Angela's contact information, and if you have any sort of specific questions and things like that, feel free to reach out. She's a wealth of information, and also a professor, by the way, an adjunct professor. So I'm sure she can pretty much steer you in the right way, especially if you're interested in actually becoming an HR professional. So thank you, everyone. This has been Ask Me Anything with Angela Shaw, and I will see you again soon.
Thank you, Phoenix.
Bye,
Thank you,
guys.
Angela.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.